We have a wonderfully full room for a wonderful evening. I tend to say this a lot because the exuberant introduction is always a difficult one to do. Hélène Binet is, I think, someone who has been well known to many of us, and which is probably why this room is so full and, in fact, filling up by the minute. This is a moment to talk about a beautiful book, which is available, which I'm sure there'll be an even further introduction to. But I think most importantly, what this has revealed is that Hélène has worked for so many years in collaboration with architects in a tremendous range that has given focus from a material perspective and has helped our understanding, particularly from a pedagogical framework, of how we view architecture and the variation between form, approach, tectonic, and context in a really fundamental way. So for so many of our students and myself, we can't possibly be in all of the places where these buildings have been constructed. And yet we then know them through your photographs. And I think so much of our understanding and so much of the way in which we teach has been informed by your decades of work, which are so beautifully represented here with also some beautiful essays. So I'm very much looking forward to this evening, and an absolute delight to meet you and to be able to have you here at the AA. So Hélène Binet, welcome.
Thank you, Ingrid, and thank you for the strong presentation. Well, what to say, it's very emotional to be here because I really started here in late 80s, coming from Italy, not having much of a knowledge of architecture. What is the thinking of architecture? Part of the fact that I grew up in Rome. But let's not be too emotional. And what comes to me immediately when I think about being here now, it's the word thank you. So thank you for this institution, because this institution gave me the opportunity to do what I'm doing now when I was really, really still very young. Thank you for all the architects that gave me also the chance to photograph and to try some of my thinking that I had about space and representation. Thank you for all the assistants. I have here at least 10 of them that have been supporting me, carrying luggage, helping, consulting me. And thank you for the publisher that trusted that we could do books together, because books, it's a wonderful way of representing, talking, exploring architecture. So yeah, this is where my thoughts are at the moment, and part of being very emotional, of course. I will talk about my work for about half an hour. It's short, and I try to condense, especially with projects that maybe are a little bit less known, not yet published, or projects where I think there's some fundamental issue, thought that I can share with you. And then we will have a discussion about the book. What was the story behind this book? The first project I will share with you, it's the one that I've done in Korea, with the help of Philobe as a sponsor. The sponsor and the institution also I want to thank, that always been behind me, like the Royal Academy gave me a show, the Swiss Embassy has been, Cultural Center has been supporting my work, so the Architect Association. So these are all key players to make the work possible. So when I work on the intimacy of making, it was maybe 5 years, 3 or 4 visits. I made a book with Lars Müller and the help of the Pro Helvetia. And this revealing of the power of the Korean architecture was for me an important step. It's not very well known. It's not Japanese, it's not Chinese, it's really Korean. And why do I put it now at the beginning of my talk? It's because I felt that somehow, and now I'm just sharing a couple of images, but the sensibility and some of the stronger concepts that are behind Korean architecture, also art and pottery, they say also food making and dance, go in tandem with some of my sensibility. So it is an architecture which is not about making big gesture. It's a very inviting architecture. They talk about the biome, which is a concept of emptiness. So how to welcome by leaving something maybe unfinished, not be too precise. There is precision, but not too refined to say, there is space for you to come. And I think in my work, for me, it's also very important to have images that let you dream, let you come in. And the concept of muck, not having any embellishment, and also look at nature with the intent of saying, let's see how this and this element can fit together. A piece of wood, stone, a tree, they come together naturally. And I think these are also part of my thinking that I would like to have in my photograph. The sense that it's not about a perfect world, it's about giving the opportunity to enter, to be embraced, and to be feeling part of it. In this book that is published by Lars Müller, there is a lot of projects. There is Confucian School, Pio San-Sevon, Yongmyon, and then there is also a tea house. Now, I'm not going to go through because we can see the book, but I wanted to talk about the next step after finishing this book. This year, I went back and said, we have these three important, let's say, typology. Let's try to photograph a temple and have a new aspect. Things went pretty wrong. When I tried to photograph a temple, I never got the permission. Even if I tried desperately to explain to the monk that maybe I was as spiritual as them with my old camera and my blanket and film than a big kind of digital thing that could go in and out without being noticed, but no. So I was a little bit upset. And that's why I did what I could, trying to celebrating the wood and the very ancient way of building that I mentioned, the way things fit in a very natural way. But then in my presentation, I also put this flower, the lotus flower, which represented purity, because I thought, oh, maybe this idea of purity is not as alive like I was hoping. So just like an observation, it's not published there at all. I still hope one day I can go back to Tondosa, but it was a sense of a little bit of frustration. So I decided that I needed to do something positive, and I went to visit, also because very much kind of inspired by the concept of muck, of not embellishment, some villages in Yandong, which is, it's a village, people live there, kind of farmhouse, but it's also a museum. So it's slightly strange. You enter an area, you pay a ticket, you leave your car or the bus, and then it has a special aspect, but it is also a bit of a museum, but it allows to keep some of these houses that are very fragile. And I say, what an amazing occasion to just look at one aspect, and it was the use of some of the natural gift that nature gave you. You wanted to have the entrance of a door, you wanted to build a wall. You just used the curvature of a piece of tree that you found. Something maybe get accentuated by the time, but it is not something that is transformed completely by the human being. And I call this little essay the Smiley House, because after all this, no, you cannot photograph. It was hard to go all the way to Korea, to a temple, and to be there and to say, no, you can't. So I needed the Smiley House to bring me back, to say, okay, that's wonderful, I'm here. I leave away the Korean architecture. I could talk more and show many other photographs, but I think here I have to give you a little taste of the things I'm doing now, and I'm planning to go back to Korea. It's the work I've done on Jeffrey Bauer at the Lund Humphries Garden. I was there 21 years ago, sent with the support of the Aga Khan Foundation, to photograph the garden for a book. And at the time, I was very much interested in finding the different mood of the garden. What was the garden trying to do by being built in a different way. It was the first time I photographed nature, so it was a bit of a shock. Where am I lying? Where are my window? Where is the walls? And how do you photograph nature? But it was absolutely incredible experience. Having the opportunity, again, with the help of Pro Helvetia, to photograph it again, I started to think I wanted to go there with a very, very, very precise, let's say, mission. What do I want to say going again? Because the garden is the same. And by reading, every time I have a bit of a moment where I need inspiration, I open the book of Bachelard, The Poetical Space, and just read the page that I opened by chance. And in that case, it was about, especially in poetry, the situation where you have vastness and grounding. So the idea of the horizon and the point. And I thought, I know that Geoffrey Bauer wanted to choose a place to do this garden. He very much felt grounded there. But he had the sense of vastness, because it's a very open a piece of land surrounded by the river Dedua that somehow is making a Z. So you can see the sunset and the sunrise very easily by just moving a little bit. And it was not easy to go with such a specific and say, I'm going to find in this place what is vastness and grounding? Is it so? Not to be immediately confronted with the subject, I say, I'm going to look for threshold. And the threshold, well, in a garden, they are easy to find. That's something I can photograph, and probably the rest will come naturally. So the threshold of the tree in front of the lake, the threshold of a wall, that is somehow a space that when the body cannot move, the mind can move, and the beautiful color that are growing naturally around this condition of humidity. The threshold of going from, let's say, a mood of very heavy vegetation to the paddy field. So they were all simple, clear passages. And moving from an edge to the next, to the valley where you have the two sides of the river, I started to notice the very ancient vase that he brought there. They were Chinese vase because the Portuguese have been in Sri Lanka. We are in Sri Lanka, and they left this vase from the Ming dynasty. And in the beginning, I just looked at them as something to collect water. It was raining heavily, and that became also a threshold. There were places I could not go at the time of the day because it was too restrictive, so heavy. And then I started to see closely the vase, and I realized that there was lichen growing, a very ancient, rich, and wonderful form of life that can survive very hard condition. And somehow I felt grounded with the presence of the vase. They are scattered around. They're very beautiful. They're sometimes next to the house. They're sometimes in a field. It's really a strong presence. And then this movement between the sunset and the sunrise, almost feeling like I'm a little Le Petit Prince that is moving with his chair to just see these two very important moments of our day. I found my vastness and groundness. So this is a very reduced form. I hope to make a book. I have maybe altogether 40 photographs, or 35 minutes of photographic essay that somehow describe this garden through my eyes and through the concern. It's a concern that I found because I was interested. Places for me are always a way to understand why we are there and who we are. So I think vastness and the point and the grounding are very, very important. And I think, the Lunar Garden gives you this opportunity. You all probably know, especially architects, the work I've done on Peter Zumthor. He's been extremely important again, as a young photographer, I was approached by him and asked to make the famous book Works. And this collaboration has been definitely very special and defining a lot what I did year after. But looking also at the project I just presented, I noticed that more and more I'm moving away from the more monolithic architecture with the concrete, the stone. In the beginning, I was very much attracted to, and looking at nature and looking at gardens. And I wanted to say where this is coming from, what was my first approach to this, and who has been inspiring me. And I just, the same way with this book, we've been revisiting. I revisit my work, my negative, my transparency, to just bring together photograph where the nature, the gardens, the landscape, the surrounding is very important for the definition of the growing or the being of the architecture. And it was somehow revealing to see how, like now it's a very important topic, was coming in slowly into my work. In the book, we have a wonderful essay by Marco Iuliano, but we also have a wonderful essay by Martino Stierli. And he wrote, saying about my work, that somehow was trying to talk that architecture is part of the sphere of culture and nature. And I really like that description, that somehow it's not a completely separate object, but it's growing into our natural surrounding. So, more of this collection. Like, most of the work is known for the black and white. I work on film. I carry on this tradition of not going digital and slowness and mistake. Everything is possible, and you can't correct more than that the film will allow you. So it's a lot of celebration of the moment that for me it's important, and it's about being there at one particular moment that you decide this is my photograph. I don't want to leave this field because I think it's really giving me a type of image and concentration that I cannot find with another way. Doesn't mean that digital cannot bring you something special, but this is the way I work. And also I started with a lot of black and white, but the color also is coming into my work more and more with great pleasure. Sometimes I find it hard because I print a lot of the black and white and I cannot print color, so I need to give to somebody. But I have strong collaboration, this task to bring the color alive that I have in mind. And also it takes time to imagine a color. What is the color you want? It's not only something that, because you've been somewhere and then you have a transparency, but still you want to reach something. And I'm enjoying very much this process. Let's leave Zumthor for a moment. I could also talk a lot about being with him and visiting his places, to go in a city where I grew up, in Rome, and to talk about a small project that I started in 2019. I don't exclude it is finished, but it brought me to photograph with a completely different intent. So the series of photographs I made of small detail, very free. I work with a Hasselblad, which is a square format, and I work with a 4x5, which is something more, has to be with the tripod, it's slower. But the Hasselblad is more playful. I can also not, it's better to use a tripod, but I can also play with it. And I was visiting the Villa Adriana outside Rome, and at that time I was also reading the biography of the Emperor Adrian by Marguerite Yourcenar, that gives you a very strong feeling of what this man wanted in life. And then, of course, after that, he also he was commissioning the Pantheon. So much energy into architecture, But the things I was interested is such a gesture, like making the first cupola, making the Pantheon. It's a man that one defy gravity. And that's a very strong desire. And when I looked at the angel of Ponte Sant'Angelo, they are from Bernini or his school. I think only 2 are done by him, and they are in the church, not on the Ponte Sant'Angelo. What he was trying to do with these details, this cloth of the angel on the body, he was trying to defy the gravity, because suddenly you imagined the angel can fly. Without this, you can't. It's structurally the wings are big, are heavy. It will be very difficult to give the same feeling. So the textile on the body of the angel will give you that feeling. So I'm not the only one, but I think there's also a tradition behind this. Try to bring together art or architecture in similar intention over a completely different period. It's something that is very much stimulating my imagination. Been more in Italy, and also with the support of a wonderful architect from Thailand, Mr. Ongard, I started to photograph Palladio. It's when I was saying I'm going to do more garden, more flower, more nature, I found myself and I said, well, Hélène, that's very difficult to stand there, and I'm completely aware how much is being studied, written, and how many interpretations of the Palladio and how passionate architects are about this work. I compare a lot about the study of the Fugue of Bach. There is all the great musicians wanted to make their own study about how it's been composed. That's the same with Palladio. But I thought, I'm not a specialist, I'm not going to make calculation the way that I work. Let's play it, let's sing what I feel and I see. Because that's my instrument, it's not anymore my violin, like I was 8 years old, but it is my camera. And something will come. So, and one of the main, let's say, word that was guiding me was expectation. How much his work was about building this expectation of entering, seeing the mountain behind, entering, understanding a new space, a new room. So I feel very shy in relation, especially here with a public of architects, but I thought this is something I really want. So it's the beginning. I will go again. I will do more. And another dimension that I'm really interested is the use of the different surfaces, the stucco that is on the building, to reflect the light. I know some are not anymore the original one, and it's very hard to copy the same technique, but still the intent is there. There's something that Janne Palasma said about my work, and I think I really like to mention it as a method. He talks about how in the photograph I try to talk about nowness and the past, clarity and obscurity, precision and vagueness. So those elements opposite each other don't have to be excluding each other, but can be met in the same photograph. In that case, you know you're maybe in the same place. The fog is physical, but then the fog becomes also the painting of a wall that somehow has been damaged by humidity. And all of that is creating an image in your brain, in your ability to make stories. And it's for me a very spatial experience. So if architecture cannot be moved, we know we need books, we need drawing, we need photograph to communicate, but we also need the reader. And that's also to go back to a beautiful lecture of, it's a discussion between Sontag and John Berger, where he talked about storytelling, and he said, there is the story, there is the person that writes the story, and there is the reader. And I want to give a lot of power to the reader. The image should never be an image where you think, I know everything. The image is just the beginning of your own story when you look at the photograph. I'm not naming all the villas, some of recognize, but I was in the Saraceno, Emo, Barbarano, and Poiano. Or Poiana. And that's the Redentore. But not a villa, a church. Just a little excursion on Gottfried Böhm. I photographed his work for an exhibition to celebrate his 100 years, birthday for 100 years. As you can see, the date 2020 wasn't an easy date. We had COVID. I managed to photograph. I managed to put the exhibition together. He managed to see it. And then the day after, the exhibition closed. So I never saw the exhibition set up. The work is there. I hope there will be other occasion. But I was very pleased he could see it. It was wonderful to photograph something, first of all, for such a respectable 100 years architect, in the town where most of the church are, because then it's not about representation. It's not about communicating what it is. Everybody's been there. Everybody knows the church. But it was really about me trying to bring a different level of what I understand of these places that are, for me, I would call it like little pockets of dream that allowed you, when you enter a church, to have your own spirituality. And sometimes he used very heavy concrete, quite dominant, and sometimes you don't know if you are seeing origami or a concrete detail of a church. So, that's also one of the, let's say, not super recent, but work which not published yet, not exhibit much, so I like to share it with this format of a lecture. You might know this work I've done on the Suzhou Garden for an exhibition at the Power Station of Art in Shanghai. It was something done in 2018. The director said, okay, we're going to bring all your work, Hejduk, Zumthor, Zaha, everything was there, but we want something Chinese. And I didn't want to do a contemporary, a little bit for political reason, how to choose, but also because I became to be more and more interested in garden. And in the city of Suzhou, a lot of gardens are still there. They always surrounded a beautiful villa. They are sometimes a little bit kitsch, lots of bridges and plants and bonsai, but I found the wall absolutely mesmerizing. And there's a lot of story about why this garden and why the wall, but there's also a sense that maybe who was the owner of this garden had been too close to the emperor and was asked to set up and not travel too much because he knew too much. So the garden was really a physical boundary, and the wall even more. So again, when your body cannot walk, your imagination goes. And by pure chance, by the fact that the country is humid, is full of, again, lichen and humidity, I was seeing landscape in those gardens, beautiful landscape that who is inside, who lives there, could not experience anymore. So this is a little book also, Lars Müller. It's a format that I really enjoy, to have one topic, one experience, and one small book. And go a little bit faster, but just wanted to make sure we have time to talk enough. Of course, every photograph deserves more discussion. I like sometimes anecdote. Yes, when I work, there's a lot of preparation. The time of the day, the type of film, what to do, where to be, and everything. There I was almost gone. I had already folded the camera and the tripod, and I saw the light. And no, I have to do this, because there was 3 windows. And there was a 4th light, and I keep saying, 4 or 3, 4 or 3. Few seconds, because I know it's moving. I say, I have 3 cats, I'm going to meet with 3. So there is rationality, there is a lot of preparation, but when you're working there and you know you have few minutes, you have something of you that comes out that is nothing to do with the real Suzhou Chinese garden, but you have to decide how to make a decision. I also wanted to talk about this place because it's such a loved and incredible piece of architecture that I photographed for a little book. The book is very pleasant. It has all the photographs. It's very solid. I wanted to talk about it because I was fascinated about why these men went there, build a house. It's not these grandiose things to see the sea and enjoy the summer, what you think, Mallorca. It's a tough place with wind, with the sea that you can't access. He was upset. It was after not really finishing the Opera Insignia. He wanted to deal with nature and strong element of nature and be alone. And he built something that is a bit grotto, that is really a place of concentration and relationship with things that are not really human, but it is nature. And you see how fragile the material is, how the wind has been completely changing the shape of the architecture. So just to enter this and I'm very shy to say, because again, there's been so much study about Utzon and the Candlis. It's one of the most complex pieces of architecture, but I leave it to the specialists. I come there with my own sensibility. And in the end, it's about our fragility. This little stone for me represents how in the front of the sea and the sun and the wind, we are so fragile. So you don't see the architecture, but you have one moment where you just see what is really this building for me. Let's try to wrap into an end this talk before we can share the book. And I'm just presenting a couple of images that are, let's say, born here. That was the first commission that Albin Boyarsky gave me to photograph St. Mark by Sigrun Leverance. This, with the photograph you will see of John Hejduk in Berlin, are the first photo of architecture that I've done. I had no idea what to do. I was really green, and I was say, why you don't photograph Leverance? And I was okay, and I was alone, no assistant, broken camera, lots of problem. And I think some of this work was very successful. So with this, in the School of Architecture with young people here, I want to say, trust your energy when you're young. It's a very special time when you are here and you are study. It's hard. Things don't come easily. You have to work hard because nothing comes from the sky easily. But you have inside you a very powerful moment, and trust and go for it. So I always like to talk in School of Architecture and to be confident. Doesn't mean you don't have to work, but be confident. There's something special going on. And yes, how can I say? I cannot have a talk without speaking about John Hejduk. He say he teach by osmosis, and that's pretty right. I was never a student of his, but I really learned so much by just being next to him, to look at his drawing, to look at his poetry, and to feel that he's always hiding a secret somewhere in his work. And this is also one of the first 4x5 photographs of architecture that I've done. I think that's pretty good. So, yes, I had in mind, my big reference was Lucien Hervé, was Molinaghi, was Man Ray, was that period of re-examining everything, looking at something upside down, not having any conventional image. That's where I was coming in my education. But it came just, for me, there was no other way to photograph than what I did. And only after I started to rationalize, to put together my thought, to think further about what is space for me and what is photography. And then bit by bit, with all this piece that he drew in a project called Security, and then they were built by students of architecture around the world, from Atlanta to Philadelphia and to the Architecture Association. I like to finish the talk with being here in the front of the building, photographing at night the collapse of time. This was somehow built by the student, but at the time my husband, is still my husband, but then boyfriend, Raoul Bunchoten, and then he was with Don Bates. They built it, students were around, and I remember at night I saw for the first time John Hejduk arriving with his wife Gloria. It was a special moment. And here's some kind of historical moment that are very emotional. The building of the collapse of time, the pulling up of the Tower of Time. And yes, Alvin Boyarsky, John Hejduk, my husband, Don Bates, and myself later on with John Hejduk. And before I leave Marco to talk, I'd like to finish with this image of John Hejduk that's been so important. And what he holds a book, a little book. He was reading a poem to commemorate the life of Alvin Boyarsky. And I think his hands are so beautiful. And we all love so much this form of expression. And I think for architects it's also very important. So I think that was a nice way to move to our book. So thank you.
Good evening. So Ingrid was saying that it's very difficult to introduce. Imagine me coming after Hélène, but we will try our best. So thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, first of all, to Hélène, obviously, for sharing these years, I would say, because I think we are since, COVID time that we are starting, when we started this work. I have obviously to thank Ingrid and the Architectural Association for hosting us. Obviously, Hélène is a second home for her, but for me, it has been for a short period, I think, in 2011 when I was visiting teacher, but always a place of great imagination. I have also to say that actually, as a personal anecdote, we met with Ingrid at Cambridge in another life now, it seems. I think for 12 or 14 years ago when I was there working with Francois Pence on a research fellowship on architectural photography. Francois Pence, that is here somewhere. Hello. And we invited Hélène at the time because we did a wonderful, I think, conference on architecture and photography in 2012. And Hélène gave a fantastic talk at the time on the idea of space in architecture. Anyway, obviously, we all have been fascinated with her work. And again, what I'm going to do very quickly tonight is just to summarize the work in the making, because it's something that is not usually done, and there is also the added value of having an artist, like I will try to highlight even more tonight, like Hélène, that is not only generous in time and advice, but also in the way she tackled this work with us. So the architectural photography series is the first book is obviously on Hélène and is coming out officially for the first time in the public today, in a public occasion. But what is this about is an enterprise that Lund Humphries, embraced with us, I would say, and in a way is something also commendable in these times where publishers are having a difficult time, I would say, because obviously financially there are pressures everywhere. I have to say that many of the books that are done in architecture today are either funded or funded by third parties, because for the publishers it's too difficult, obviously, to make a challenge on their own. While this specific publisher embraced, again, the challenge with us at the very beginning, which I think it's something to highlight. My friend in crime in this occasion was Martino Stierli, who is an old friend, obviously has a very important role, but is interested in architectural photography from the beginning. He has written, you will know certainly, about Venturi Scott Brown, and particularly on the archive, on their Los Angeles trip, as well as more recently on montage in architecture and through photography and collage. So the real thought that there is behind all this was a simple one, in my mind. The only thing that I thought could have been very interesting to do. You know, the relationship with the artist usually is very strange with writers. Either, writers of architecture, of art, or in general, wait that an artist dies. So, and we didn't want this with Hélène, obviously. So it's the idea that you can collaborate, you can have a dialogue, rather than, writing in a separate way. So we basically generated this intellectual triangle, we would call it, with Martino and Hélène, and start to think how something could be said for architectural photographers, because the series is to not simply put them in the architectural world where obviously they are already well known, they have their space, and Hélène is at the top of this space in the world, but to consider them artists, because this is not something so well recognized, because they are always in the shadow of the architects or their work of architecture. So we made quite strong choices. Even in the books, for example, there are no captions to the images, because it's important that you stop to look at the work that Hélène does, that she has shown to us how poetic is her work, as if we were looking at a painting and not at a work of architecture represented. Obviously, there is also the professional work, there is also the way of representing, and yes, as both Hélène and Ingrid were saying before, the possibility through photographers to see the work of architecture travel around the world for something that by its own nature is, stuck in a place. And, we have visited probably, 5–10% of these buildings that we think we know, but we know through an image. So the point was, these are artists, should be considered as artists, and if we have tried to do something in these books, this is one, I think, the most important thing. So again, the artifact for Hélène is very important. I think she mentioned the ground. I'm not going, obviously, here of doing a lecture on Hélène at all, but I want to focus on some aspects that were fundamental to build the book. And being the first book, again, Hélène has helped to shape how we could have tackled a subject that might seem easy, but is not at all. So there are obviously the precedents that for an artist are sometimes difficult to speak about, because they always feel that, they are, if you pass me the word, copying something, or making something that is less original in their work because they are speaking about their sources. And I think that this, in the case of Hélène, is quite the opposite. She's very interested in speaking about her inspiration. In this case, you will recognize Lucien Hervé in Chandigarh, and the photographs of the photographer known for his collaboration with Le Corbusier for 25 years. But in the case of Hélène, this is not true, because actually when she looks at this work, she finds inspiration for her imagination. So there is nothing to copy, but it's a starting point to, make new challenges. And as well as, it's not here, but the work of Judith Turner in abstraction. So what is the book about, and how, again, we tackled is what I'm trying to say in these 5-6 following minutes. The thinking is that for each book of the series, now there is the second one in the making by Valeria Carullo and Martin Kagan-Smith on Richard Bryant, is to have one author that is closer to the biography of the artist, and to speak about the personal evolution, because it's very important to have a dialogue with the person and understand where is she coming from, where she wants to go also, because as you have seen, Hélène is changing also more recently the direction of her interests. In evolution, of course. And then the other that positions the work of the artist in the contemporary realm. And then there is the part of the catalog. And again, all this is all done in dialogue. There is nothing that is done by one alone, but always in dialogue, because dialogue enriches everything in an incredible way. So the sections in which the book is divided are 6. There were 5, but then at some point we couldn't find the place for some photographs. No, every time I remember many discussions with Hélène, okay, where should we put this? These are so different. Well, this doesn't belong to anything, while others obviously could belong to more than a section, because there is a feeling, and it's also something in a way artificial, but it tries to structure the thoughts that are behind her making. So the 5 that are in a way representing her work are traces, passage of light, narratives, sequence, and abstraction, and I'm going to say a few words about it. And the one that is, outside everything is at play, because you have seen how, Hélène is very playful also in her way of being, very positive in her relationship with life and things. And so this is very much reflected in her work and in her way of representing the world that surrounds us. In a way, she says always, yes, at some point I have to forget everything about architecture because she has done too much. So I have to go and photograph something that is very different. There is a beautiful photograph that I haven't brought in this selection, is in the book, that is was very touching when she told me, there are 2 big shadows of 2 tables on the ground. Again, the ground that is one of her strong themes that is transversal to all of this that we are speaking about. And these 2 shadows, one is smaller and one is bigger. And she said, oh, when I see this, I see my parents. So it's, the conversation can go in this way, like she has, told you before about the 3 cats in Suzhou. So another thing that connected us in the making of the book very much was the fact that we really like to work with physical artwork. This is a world where things are dissolving in a way. It's all immaterial, it's all digital, while obviously she has a passion, and for her, actually, she says in the work we recorded this, for her the work of the photographer is the print, to print, actually. When she's in this world with no light and she's dreaming how to make things appear to us, she's making something. This thing of making something that, again, even in the school of architecture, I have to say, is slowly disappearing. It's always more challenging to push students to do things without a router, without a computer, with hands simply cutting and, making things less precise. So what we did is, when we started all this work and we were in contact with Martino, at some point, I I don't know how this thing came up, probably because Hélène did it with Zumthor before. So she said, okay, let's put everything on the wall. So we were printing these small photographs with the printer, and then we were putting these on the wall to try to find visual analogies, a logic of continuity. And, you know, everything was coming little by little together. I think also an enthusiasm that grew little by little at the point that, you know, we were putting the last image in the book, you know, let's put something that you have done the day before yesterday, because it's important to have everything in it. And so we started to compose the book. Obviously, there were also moments of disagreement about you know, various things. You know, we can explore perhaps in the conversation after with things that she was saying, no, this will not work at all, I don't like it, you know, you cannot do this, stop it here. But then sometimes it works, sometimes work less, but it did. Another aspect that I want to focus a bit, she has shown Rome, rightly so, because she grew up there. But another place that actually for me was, you know, made me understand really her way of thinking and looking at things was this small village, Sperlonga, that is in between Rome and Naples by the sea, where she spent basically the other half of her youth. It's a beautiful Mediterranean village. And then she was very shy, I have to say, because when I said, oh, may I see something that you have done there at the very beginning, it would be very important. And she said, no, well, there is something, but they are not so nice, I don't know. Then in the end, after, you know, a bit of persistence, that is my only quality, she came up with these beautiful little images of the village. There are a few here, but they are really beautiful. Someday she knows that we will have to do something on it, because there are, you know, the laundry hanging like in a court of houses. It's everything is beautiful, and you can see the seed also with light and shadow, for example, at the crossroads on the right, of things that then she will do later on. The book has been also a journey, which is beautiful, a physical journey. So we went again back to Sperlonga together. This was, I think there were 45 degrees that day in the summer when we were looking at the first drafts of the book, but was quite a beautiful day for the relationship with the village itself. So let's go very quickly in the 5 or 6, you know, at play. I told you that is the jolly one section. So the traces, I mean, I would let you read. So we have each section has an extended caption that basically has been written mostly by Hélène, again, in dialogue with us, but is mostly her thinking. So for the traces, here is Carrara, that is a beautiful photograph that shows how she's interested also in the tectonic, to use a word very dear to our friend Kenneth Frampton, that wrote a very nice blurb on the book. Shows the human presence, but the human presence for Hélène can be this of centuries, or geological eras, to also the presence of moments on architecture. So the water on a facade of Alvar Alto that is dissolving, or you know, a beautiful table ready to eat at lunchtime that then will change. You know, this idea of the change that can be very slow or can be very fast. You know, the passage of light is something I don't want to stop, because it's basically perhaps her most known quality. And so this is the zone that I find also beautiful, the way of condensing, interpreting, as she was saying, subjects, and, you know, giving back to us the idea of these places as it is difficult to see in others, you know, because it's so, you are there when you see this, for people who have been there. For people who haven't, you imagine, and your imagination moves. These are the series at play where, you know, subjects are simply tickling her fancy, we would say. Then there is one section that actually I was very keen on, and then we started the dialogue with Hélène and Martino. It's, we call it narratives, because basically there is a thing that I always thought about the photographers. Basically, the journal commissions them a job, a work. They do a number of photographs, sometimes can be 10, sometimes can be 100. But then there is someone who curates, who edits all the work. So the original idea, the original feeling, the original connection of the author, of the artist, again, with the architectural object, with the natural environment that surrounds, is lost. So for once, let's give the opportunity to the artist to generate her own narratives, because it can be more than one. So how would you represent a building? Not a journal of architecture, but you. And so it's very interesting in the way she has presented this little house, summer house of Maria Giuseppina Grasso Cannizzo in Sicily. It's a sliding house. Probably some of you know the project. It's a very beautiful, imaginative project where this house can close and then it opens. And then you see that Hélène has found all the relationship of the architect with the place, because she was photographing old abandoned trucks in the city or buildings that are on top of a hill. And so how all these kind of imaginative moments then are condensed by the architect in one gesture that is the project. And then what I found really beautiful is that there are 3 images in the book, in which one, this one that looks like a postcard of the 50s in Italy, I don't know, I have this feeling, but she represents the owner of the house. There is a second one there where is the architect at night in a beautiful, I would say, like 1930s image, and it's the architect, in beautiful dress at the end of the building at night. And then there is also the photographer, and this is the most shy. It's a shadow of the photographer on the side of the building. So again, poetic, but a narrative that for once is given in the hands of the author and not of an editor. Sequence is something that I have to say Martino was very keen on, rightly so. So basically, Hélène, we can speak about this perhaps later on, but as some influences from other photographers, very not known at all. It's Upka, is an Austrian photographer. Again, we can talk about later, who was photographing actually La Pietà di Michelangelo, but in fragments. So as this idea of using the fragments to represent an object, she has explained it, but many times she conceives sequences of images, 2, 3, that she wants then the person who is looking at to reconstruct in his or her mind the space that these images suggest. So can be something that is real, can be something that is completely disconnected with the object that she's photographing, but it is a deliberate exercise, I would say. So in this case, there are the shadows at La Tourette. Then we move to the last part of the last section that is about abstraction. Again, here there is a lot of connection with Judith Turner and her way of photographing. In this case, we have made this metaphor, I would say, of the first work she did on Hejduk in Philadelphia. And so here instead is the reconstruction of the sculptural object that came in the Royal Academy, and then with the detail of Leon Battista Alberti, where you can really feel the materiality and, again, the man in the making of these artifacts. Now, to finish, to conclude, this is another space that I found magical, is the Lund studio. She always says, oh, but you cannot put these images, these are too messy, I don't like them. Well, I think there is a beauty in this space and in these boxes that are all stacked. I mean, I think they're really the witness of a moment of her work, of the beauty of her work also in the making. Yes, this is with one of her former assistants, Jasmine Bruno. She's around today. I mean, I cannot tell you, I was witnessing them printing some images and they were making me mad because basically they were comparing two images that were the same and then they said, but here there is more black, here there is more white. Okay, well, I mean, I'll get the one that you will discard, don't worry. Finally, and actually, Hélène is on the left, is a photograph done in the studio by Jasmine Bruno that to me really summarizes how she's really like that, you have seen tonight. And one thing that I always wanted to do with Hélène was to go back to Rome. Obviously we share also the Italian language and the Italian culture, so was, and I said, well, I had the luck of having one of my friends being the director of the Pantheon at some point, still now. So I said, Hélène, perhaps we can go on the roof of the Pantheon. She said, no, you're joking, it's not true this. So I said, okay, bring your camera. And then we went there and you can see like, I wouldn't say a toddler because it's not, but, in the happiness, with this camera that didn't want to come down from the roof. So again, for all this, thank you, Hélène, and again, thank you for coming tonight, and let's continue over the conversation. Thank you.
I so much enjoyed seeing the images, but also through your eyes. When I was looking through the book, because I did steal one briefly from the bookshop before I have this wonderful copy in front of me, I was considering this aspect of narrative, which I'd love to hear a little bit more about, because in many ways, the way in which you describe it when talking about the images feels like it has a wonderful parallel with the design process, particularly within a school of architecture. Whereas I often say, you're always sort of waking up from a dream and stringing together fragments of your sensibility about a space. But I'm wondering, when you start to select your images as you have chosen them, rather than being chosen by a journal, to what extent that narrative is in dialogue with the author of the building, and to what extent you're in conversation with those who are living and you have the opportunity to talk to them about their work. Does that inform the narrative that you build in your images, or is it an entirely separate process?
The owner or the maker?
The maker.
The maker.
Yeah.
I think it changed a lot. I always say I come, and even if I'm insisting that I will be there a few times, sometimes a week, and I come back, I don't have the same relation than an architect that has been working 5-6 years on a project. So to listen from the maker, it's very important. I like to surprise the maker also, to say, you work on something so long, and maybe I can come with a fresh eyes and tell you a new story. But it's not always easy, but I think it has to happen that way, that I can have a new view. Because if you design already with your image in your mind, I think there's a problem. You have to, especially it's architecture, you have to leave place for unknown things. And then I think then the building is really successful, that you plan so much, and actually it's even more because other people see other things. So, yeah. But it's important to know what, the story of what the architect is seeing and why he was trying to do, and what was his first dream.
I mean, for me, and I don't know, Marco, if you would agree, I think that there's a very mysterious quality to the way in which you depict spaces. There's a level of ambiguity, there's a level of fragility within not just the surface, but the depth that one produces within the image. And by contrast, for instance, and this is a big contrast, I think of the artistic work of someone like Richard Wentworth, and when you're walking around with him in a space, he sees a kind of punchline in everywhere he looks, and you're kind of always part of the discovery of something that is inherently absurd or humorous. And I think there's a very particular quality of your work which feels like there is that fragility and ambiguity. And I don't know if that's something that informed the way in which you also structured the images in the book, or the conversation you had between you as you assembled the sequences.
I think, yes, you have touched one point that I think Martino, elaborate a bit in the book. And it's this idea, if you think to the image that she has shown of a Hejduk in Berlin, no? Where you have these two surfaces, and you don't really understand when one starts and the other ends. So there is always this kind of ambiguity that obviously is a strength for the reason that she was saying before about the imagination, because that's the moment in which the imagination starts to work, or at least I read it in this way. I don't know how much this is conscious or unconscious in her way of looking and representing things, but certainly is always present, as you have highlighted.
But to go back to the book, I think the book has very precise somehow division, but I think it must be clear, and it probably is clear to everybody, that there is just one moment for the book. Those divisions are not strict. We could have put a photograph of a series into the light or into the playfulness. So I think in that case we can go back to the fact that things have a fluidity, and I hope this come true. That somehow through the process of making, we wanted to take some of this the same line of work and see how they are expressed in different works or architecture or moment of my work, but nothing is strict. So that's...
I think that's very apparent. I mean, to a large extent, every time you go through the images, everything could be narrative or everything could be sequence. Certainly, but to some extent, it also could be that positive passage of light. There's a passage of light also through the entire book, and that one goes from the very abstract and rather contrasted, chiaroscuro, etc., through to, again, something that becomes extremely painterly within the very, very kind of balance of very delicate surfaces. Also, your landscapes are then depicted as a surface rather than as a ground, which I found absolutely fascinating.
But this I haven't seen yet, so I'm wonderful that the idea that the book has also a passage of light in gradation. So, that's the same that when you make architecture, you do yourself something your best, and then somebody will see something else. So, yeah.
I suppose I would be remiss if I didn't really want to ask you some questions about the time you were here at the AA.
No, good.
And I'd like to draw some probably unrealistic parallels between the fragmentary nature of how you piece an image together and the opportunities of a series of incidental voices that animated the place while you were here. But that may be an overly extended metaphor.
I don't know what to say. I didn't understand English. I didn't know any architecture. I was completely overwhelmed. I had a very dry education, lots of technique. I grew up in Rome, in this village. I was a lot home educated, so very free mind. And I just became alive. All those different parts of my experience started to grow, but very slowly, because really I remember going to a meeting for one of the first book with Dennis Crompton, and I would say, Raoul, please come with me. I don't understand anything. He said, no, you go. And I managed to arrive 3 hours later because I didn't get the right time. It was all like this. So, but I could see Zaha Hadid talking in a jury to the student, Peter Salter making things with this, for the exhibition, Peter Cook drawing madly. It was there. It was all so much alive, and I was very thirsty for content because the education I had was too dry, and finally I could put my wish to make images with content. It was great. The first book was for me. If we want anecdote, the story, the Leverance, I remember working very hard, making those images and finding that they were this size in a book. And I work on 4x5 camera, and I wasn't happy. And then at the time, I forgot who it was. He said, "Listen, young lady, this is not your portfolio." And I said, I was so upset. And then I went to Alvin and he said, "Okay, next time you are there at the layout." So we did Picciones and I was there at the layout. And we make the story. I mean, when I make a book, it's very, very rare that I'm not part of the making of the story. Let's say that will be more for magazine. Or, also the architect will need the photograph to do something and I have to let it go. But it was completely different. And then we edit the photo together, we make the layouts, grow together. This different way of working. But,
I mean, I like this idea that there's a lack of communication and a moment of being lost, which I sort of hope we still have here at the AA.
One thing that probably is nice to ask also to Hélène to respond to is the relationship with music, because I discovered that Hélène's parents are were, because the father unfortunately is not with us anymore, where her mother at 90s super in Rome. We visited her, but this relationship with music, because it has a strong influence, I think, on her way of looking at things and making also photography. So perhaps it's nice to hear from her on this aspect.
This is how I grew up. I grew up in a family of musicians. I was doing more music than math or literature and something else. But it really shaped a lot my sensibility. But then I said, I'm not going to be a musician. I wasn't so good. But I think music also is very close to architects, and the making of a piece of music, or to make it, the preparation of a building. There's a lot of analogy. But the way I use it often, let's say the most, of course, it's part of me. But it's when people want to understand my role in relation to the work. And I always say, I respect the score. It's the architect. I want to know the period, what is there, but then I play it. It's my sound. I play it. So music is definitely part of me becoming what I do now, but it's also often a way to explain the work and to explain what is my position in relation to architecture, because I think that the interpretation and the score, the building and the photographer, there's this very strong. There's so much in connection between music and contemporary architecture.
I think sometimes also in music it's easier to make reference to your predecessors, where you find certain themes or motifs that run through, that elaborates on. And I thought what was really fascinating is the influences on your work very early on, and how clearly visible it is within your own early photographs, and how important for perhaps young students, the ability to understand that you're making references to people whose work you admire without that being problematic. And then I'm wondering if you feel that at what point you felt that your own work grew away from the references that were so important to you when you were developing it.
Well, definitely when I photographed Zaha Hadid, there's no reference to her work. So
Schwitters, maybe. Maybe Schwitters.
Yeah, maybe, and the Russian painting, and Malevich, and but her building, no, I think there was no. And yes, Hejduk. At that time, I was very much into Man Ray and Molinari. But again, if you photograph these houses in Berlin, and there's not much reference to something. And I think to be also not so knowledgeable then, I was knowledgeable in photography, but not in architecture photography, allows me to have a fresh mind and not to refer to something else. And I think often we tend, and it's rare because we are bombarded by image, to be fresh in front of what you see and wanted to say something from what you see. And again, I always say that when I was in photographic school, we had one book at the end of the year that will all waited in the shop to have all the best photographer of the year. We didn't have 100 of picture on our phone, on our computer, and even little magazine or little. So the inner understanding was easy because you were not confronted with so much images. So that's a process that I always say, I was lucky. And to start to photograph architecture by photographing genre, I was lucky because he had, I think his work, there's nothing you can compare to. So you have to decide how you're going to approach it. You cannot say, I'm doing this way. I'm doing this.
Yeah.
It would have been harder, I think, to start to photograph Le Corbusier because I would have felt immediately, I'm doing a Lucien Hervé.
Yes, exactly.
But that was,
It's an incredible moment. I mean, I think perhaps maybe what I'm saying is that there's no shame in those references because they become the sort of the food from which you can you feed for a period of time.
Exactly.
If you're using them knowingly, and I think it's actually very nice to see a certain use of light or a certain use of form. That is
it's the attitude that counts more. I mean, Man Ray and this period, there was really the desire to see, I'm photographing this, but I don't have to be. I can be like this, like this, like this. I can make it jumping. There was this desire to reinvent the object and the looking, and that's what is important. It's the intention. It's not the final project. It's the also nowadays in relation to reference. I think it's you have to. Yeah.
I think Ingrid was mentioning the fragments that obviously are such an important part of her way of looking at architecture, and I would be really interested if you could elaborate on the Hupka relationship, because I found it always beautiful and very...
Again, I grew up in Rome, and the Pietà, it's an amazing sculpture by Michelangelo that we all go and see it, but it's a bit hard. It's up there, there's a glass, there's not a real relationship, and you can buy some postcards which have the same kind of view. And one day in a little souvenir shop for religious people, I found this book not bigger than that from this Hupka photographer, which has his, he did some beautiful work, and he was allowed to photograph the Pietà once she was, I think, on the way to New York for an exhibition, but also after, because there was a madman that broke. So he was alone in a room with one light and could go to photograph every angle of this sculpture. And that's one of the most beautiful books I have. It's so incredible. I mean, the piece is incredible. But from the hand, from the hair, from the eyes, from the ear, you never have that experience. And often I say, I would like to do the same with the building. That you go in little places, in corners where normally you can't, and you put together also parts that are normally not exactly what you are experiencing every day, and you make a photographic say. This dismantling and rediscover also through the light, because the light in those photographs, it's very strong. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Now, Marco, you may have lots of questions. I'm also aware that there might be people in our audience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I've spoken far too much.
I'm sure there are people here that have questions for Hélène or for Marco. There's someone just here.
Thank you for this wonderful lecture. Hélène, can you talk a little bit about your relation to the materiality of the photograph and, in a way, your resistance to digital, and what does it give you, the analog and the work with this camera, with this slow, kind of painful sometimes sort of process of working with film, which is so difficult to find these days to process. And yeah.
I grew up with this, so I find it difficult to change, but thinking about why this resistance is that I like to celebrate the moment, and I think with the analog you do that more. Film, like you said, difficult to find, they're expensive, you have to prepare, you go to a shoot with 20 film and you have to do something. that puts your mind in a very specific place where you know you have to give yourself completely, absolutely in that moment. It's like a performance or recording, again, a relationship with music. If you are recording, you can then after mix and put it. If you are, maybe it's not going to be perfect, but if you're in a room, a full auditorium with 200-300 people, there's something of you that is going to be really special. And we have the ability of going to a kind of trance. And this is the moment I don't want to miss, is the fact that you have to concentrate completely. And you have to also deal with limitation. I mean, going back to Michelangelo, limitation, one piece, hard piece of marble, that's make you doing something very special. If you have all this opportunity, I think we don't get the best of ourselves with that. So that's why. But it doesn't mean that there's not wonderful artists working with digital. Absolutely, I don't want to. But it fits me more than.
Hi, Hélène. I was going to ask what values you're trying to pass on to people when you take your photographs, and you're sort of visualizing the present and the past. But how can people use that to visualize the future? So how can it help to inform future practice?
I mean, not in a specific way. I think any true expression and sincerity in a work that hopefully I can transmit is a positive input for especially a young person to look at the world. I don't want to be nostalgic. I don't want to bring as a value to say, you know, the past was better, the old was better, the stone was better, and now this is not the message, absolutely. I work a lot with also historical building, and I did contemporary, and it's about looking for places where I think we can have an answer or a dimension to understand difficult conditions. But the value are honesty and be true to yourself. But definitely I would be sad to be nostalgic. I think it's about going forward. Yeah.
So just like.
Hi. Sorry. So I was at this Roman baths in Rome, the Bath of Diocletian, and I was so emotional because I was feeling all these things, and I tried to photograph it because I also do photography on the side, and what came out was so different to what I felt. And that happens quite often, I guess. But does that happen to you, and how do you process how you feel and that being reflected upon photography? And I just want your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I mean, photography has also a very instant possibility. You can be somewhere, feel, and make. But the way I work, I make an essay, and I prepare. Okay, if you feel sense of freedom and a sense of amazing liberation, maybe in some details of the Adrian Villa, and then you started to think how I'm going to translate this, and it's not one shoot, one thing, and then you're finished. You go back, you structure. So. That's why photography can be so many things. It can be something very fast and very instant, and you think you can transmit immediately your feeling, but it also can be something you you prepare and you structure around a feeling. So it's not always successful. Of course, there are moments where you say, I saw something and there is something there and nothing is coming out of the photograph. But then you have to say why and what's not there and what can I change. And the idea of going back and insisting, and this is important. It's not only click-clack. You can do click-clack. It's not like a ballerina or a ballerina. You have to do hour and hour and hour of practice. You can do wonderful things very fast, but it's also good to work on it, and I think that's a different dimension. So,
thank you.
Well, it's not so much a question as a reflection on. Well, since we were talking about different technologies, this brief period in my life when I was editing an architectural magazine, I became very aware of the fact that Jim Sterling always employed the photographer Richard Einzig, and Einzig always used a plate camera. And then I noticed that the photographs of Leicester Engineering Building, for example, the grain of them, the very grain of the metal was evident in the photograph. And so I suddenly realized what difference it made, plate camera. And Helene's photographs, now I can't remember the name of an architect, but a Swiss architect in London, I suddenly saw, a floor, and suddenly the quality of the material was in the photograph, the tactile, resonant quality of the material. And of course, the book on Piccionis, really enforces that in a very powerful way. And of course, it's not a plate camera, but anyway, these are reflections on the materiality in the technology itself and the materiality of the work being represented in the photograph, and how that is a sensibility in itself, that what is conveyed, I think, to someone who is sort of fairly awake about what they are looking at is these intrinsic qualities, which are also a bit ineffable as well. And I think that the greatness of Hélène Binet's work is that aspect. And the other thought that the evening provokes is the thought about time and ruin. I particularly like these images of Canlis of Utzon, and also your remarks about the building. Well, this question of time and ruin, and also then one's own mortality in relation to time and ruin. I think all of that is an intrinsic part of what you've been able to achieve. And so, I mean, of course, this is the big problem of this moment of time, I think, which is this incredible saturation, inescapable saturation of images, and the speed with which they are proliferated. There was one other point I wanted to make, which is that at the end of the first edition of this history book, it took me 10 years to write. At the end of this first edition, I evoke Alto, and I talk about maybe as a figure which can be used to develop the future. But I also talk about the fact that I talk about high-speed photography in the way in which I thought then that high-speed photography was misleading. That many photographs of buildings with high-speed photography, when you go there, it's a disappointment because the intrinsic detail or the texture of the building and all of that is just not there, Or conversely, of course, it is there, and it's more than you expected, But I think that's the fascinating thing, I think, about photography in relation to material experience. All of that is so much part of your work, I find.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. Just a follow-up and carry on from the previous discussion. I do agree that a lot part of today's presentation that I really enjoy is this your ability to almost reinvent the subject, and what I really enjoy is that this almost felt like there's this narrative, and this, you know, the images are going very parallel, and which is an experience I wouldn't get just by seeing your work, because how ambiguous doesn't mean to be critical these images are, and I felt very much so when I see those images of Suzhou gardens, and I come from I spent a big part of my youth in that city, and it's just almost feel like it's strangely familiar seeing those part of the grains on the walls and those you know, geometries, and I was wondering, it's more or less like a general question, how much of that like, you know, narrative and that intention you know, do you carry to the site when you take photograph, and how much of that potentially came from, you know, revisiting your photos, and yeah.
Yes, thank you. I don't know if I can exactly answer, but just want to do an anecdote about working and going back, and I decided also to photograph the Suzhou garden because somebody said that, oh, some of this wall are called Theatre of Shadows. Many stories I heard about that. And I did a lot of shadows, so I thought, oh, I'm going to go there and photograph the white wall as they are Theatre of Shadows. And I put my camera up and start to work. And after some days, I realized I'm doing completely wrong. This is not right. I'm bringing my Mediterranean, Italian, and the experience of Piccioni. It's not the right way. This is humid country. When I was starting to photograph every day, I needed half an hour before my lens didn't have any fog on it. It's physical, and I thought this is what I have to photograph. It's not so. When you arrive somewhere, especially in a country, in a place which is different, yes, you try to read, to understand, but you bring your heritage. You can't leave it completely, but it's also very important then to revisit and to realize that you have to be open to something completely different. And then those very soft color started to come. I was planning to do it in black and white, but I thought all this decay, all this little growth, if I do them in green, it's positive, it's growing. If I do it in black and white, they are gray. This doesn't have the same sense of life. So, yeah, working and revisiting and starting somewhere. You have to start somewhere. It's like the same when I photographed the garden of Lund Humphries by Jeffrey Bauer. I had an idea, but I couldn't just tackle the idea directly. I had to find something else to come to that. So, yeah.
Hélène, talking about color, sorry, because I think it's a very interesting discussion that we had. And again, you are speaking about the fact that, you know, you have used in parallel, and then, but now you are experimenting a lot also with color. So perhaps it's interesting also if you, because I found that aspect fascinating in the way you...
Yeah. We had a lots of fight during the book because I wanted to put on the same page color and black and white, and he didn't want. He said, always color, always black and white. So that's... but I still like to mix it, especially when there's very little color. I don't know, it's something, I think in the beginning I was really about abstraction and reduction. I can't, my big saying is, you know, I can't represent space. Space is so complex, photography is quite simple, so instead of trying to put, you know, big wide angle, big view, lots of color, lots of things that a lot of architecture photography is doing, I try to reduce, I try to do black and white, I try to do detail to give you one experience, because that's, I think, is more powerful than nothing, a big. But for that, I decided black and white also because I could print, I could control, it could be more, I don't print color. I could have done, but I haven't done. You know, Aristotle say we can hear more in the darkness, reducing make us stronger in our understanding. But with doing work which is more and more my own decision, my own path, I can use color because I can choose one color interests me. And I can do essay where I'm basing my essay in color, and then it becomes interesting. Photographing architecture, not having the possibility of saying no or yes. Sometimes it's hard. You have blue sky, green grass, a brick building. It's not nice color. You have to start to develop your own sensibility. And I like color. I don't like this image of desaturation. All the architecture, photography now have no color. No color. There is color in the building. There is color in the white. There is color in the sky. And the photographs are all desaturated. It's really something that drives me. We don't need to clean everything. Its color is beautiful. We don't need, the wall is not white. It's yellow now. And then next to it's a bit blue because it reflects the sky. Shadows are blue. We know it for many years. Let's celebrate that. So, I become more passionate also. And I had people asking me to come and photograph, and I said, it's very blue, are you okay? Because we used to put filters, we used to go on the shoot the day before, when it was only, and put some filter on the light to balance everything, because there was no scan, no cleaning of everything. And I said, are you sure? And thank God, some architects, some artists, some publisher, when I do work for others, not for me, they are happy with this. But it's rare. There's a sense of the... So the moment I'm doing my own, I love color. And I also, you want to move. You always want to discover things. It came a lot also during the lockdown that I was doing things from my studio and putting objects that fits together the color. I think, I have so much to learn, and that's nice.
I was yes, obviously all this is very important, but I was a part that, if we have to make the gossip, we have to make it proper, because it's not true that there are color images close to the black and white in the book, but nuances of color, not very strong contrast, okay, close it. But no, I was speaking about this more philosophical research about the color that you are experimenting now. So the fact that you speak about the light that touches color and then generates a light that is colored in its own right.
Yes. I mean, you can talk with Ante, he knows everything, but light is full of color, and then light touch a wall, which could be when you go to the building that he did it with Peter Salter, it touched a wall which is red. The other wall will be red, so the air has color, and if I could photograph that colored air, it's very, very beautiful. So there's a lot to do and to discover, and like some of this photo you saw of Palladio, it was just in a shade and it looks blue, but it's not blue, but the sky is blue, so it reflects, so it feels blue. And that's,
Wonderful. I think, Chantal, if we...
Antek, you want to say something very shortly about color?
I wanted to add to you what you were saying, because I think you, maybe people cannot hear, I think you brilliantly managed to come from black and white into color. I remember we talked years ago here about this very difficult transition, but you focus on tonality and that moment when tonal becomes chromatic, yes? And I think it is also something that relates to development of brain in infants, yes, where there is that moment. And somehow you catch this moment and you are sort of holding it in those photographs. So there is a tension between the tonality and the chromacity, and also you manage to convey meaning through this tension, which is remarkable. So there we go.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Well, good evening, everyone. I have the great honor to bring this fantastic event to a conclusion, sadly though, because I was ready to continue the conversation for a while. But my name is Chantal Moser. I'm the Deputy Ambassador of Switzerland here in the UK at the Swiss Embassy. And it's very emotional for me as well to be here tonight, because I've met Hélène a few years ago when we have the embassy has collaborated for a long time with Hélène, but I personally was involved when there was this amazing exhibition at the Royal Academy, and I have found memory of that show a couple of years ago. So I'm very happy to be here. I would like to thank very heartfully the Architecture Association for hosting us tonight. I think it's been fantastic, and also all of you to be here. It's been great to hear that it all started here, actually, and then the travel around the world that you have shown us a few extracts from during the lectures. So I really particularly enjoyed that. Also to see some of the work in Switzerland. As Marco was saying, the work of Peter Zumthor in Vals, which I plan to finally go this summer to, I have this feeling that I know it because I've seen the picture, the amazing photographies, but I think it's high time also to see the building in real life. It's difficult to summarize what we've heard today, and that's not my ambition, but maybe just to give you some of the points that for me are quite important after this conversation. I think we've heard the importance of the light that plays in your work, that has come back all again and again during the evening. And the light also means a lot of patience. I think you have transmitted that to us also by explaining your methods of working, of going back several times, and of taking that time. And I think it's also a lesson for us in the world that we live in today. I'm also struck by the fact that it's often debated the way of nature conflicting with architecture, and I was particularly pleased and intrigued to discover actually tonight your work about the gardens, which I was less familiar with, and this is something I'm very curious to see more about in the book. Yeah, I could go on and on, but I think I will stop here and just conclude by thanking everyone for having joined tonight, and also saying huge congratulations for the publication of the book. I think we are all eager now to rush into the bookshop to get a copy of it. And yeah, I wish you all a wonderful continuation of the evening, and Hélène especially, thank you so much for sharing all that with us tonight. Thank you.